Welcome to Twisted Remedies. I'm your host, Justin Kucher, and this is a podcast about the benefits of jiu-jitsu and other non-traditional remedies in trauma recovery. We are back here on Twisted Remedies podcast. Today is an exciting episode for me. This is going to be a great one. If you've listened to these other ones, you have heard me talk about certain things, and this episode is, I think, smashing all of that stuff together, and it's going to be great. My guest today is Anna Pirkl. When I was just telling her this prior to us hitting the record button, so she has to suffer through it again. But essentially, when I thought of doing this podcast, I had a very short list of sort of dream guests, and Anna is one of those dream guests because she's a co-author of this right here, Transforming Trauma with Jiu-Jitsu. If you are a trauma survivor, a therapist who treats trauma survivors, or somebody who runs a jiu-jitsu school or just trains jiu-jitsu, you should read this book. There is a section in the book for you, and all of the sections will benefit you. She is also a marital and family therapist, advanced alcohol and drug abuse counselor, registered art therapist, trauma specialist, and I shouldn't say the coolest. One of the coolest parts for me is she is also, she trains jiu-jitsu. So you take somebody who speaks the mental health side and also speaks jiu-jitsu side, and that's why I'm so excited about this. So Anna, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me, and I hope I live up to that introduction. My goodness.
I have no doubts. Can you give us a run through of what got you started with jiu-jitsu?
So I used to work a lot with teenagers and female teens in particular. I would be preparing them for launching off to college. And unfortunately, college is one of the best places you could be as a female to suffer a sexual assault. As such, I was always looking for different self-defense programs I could recommend to them. So if anybody told me, hey, here's another one, I would try it, just so I had a list to offer them. So I went out and tried it, immediately fell in love with the jiu-jitsu program. I mean, I was blown away at how real it was, because I knew that the groin strikes and eye gouging and the things like that I was learning in these other programs simply were not going to be appropriate for, Tom, my coworker, or, because it tends to be a lot of those assaults are done by someone we know. I'm in the fraternity brother that everybody loves, right? Right. So what other options do we have? And then how realistic is that anyway? Because I also knew that, I could train boxing for 10 years, but still hitting that moving target that's twice my size that's going to be a challenge. So I was shocked at how real it felt to me and how accessible as a smaller female, right? That I could actually use these. So I was addicted day one. And then I've gone through periods where I had to slow down and speed up, but I'm back to speed up. I'm doing between 15 and 20 hours of training a week. I watch all the videos that are available to me at Gracie University. But I'm also not in a rush. I've been told to enjoy my blue belt as long as I have it, which, hopefully it's a while longer, because I like it here in blue.
Yeah, it's blue. I'm also a blue belt, and it is I tell my white belt friends it gets easier when you get to blue belt, but it also gets a lot harder.
Yeah. Well, and I have all my friends from, I started in 2015, and they're like, Anna, come on. And I'm like, so I train a lot outside of the school too. And we might get into this if we have time, but I have a belt promotion aversion. For a number of reasons. But anyway, I also just wanted to start today by clarifying that I don't want anybody to take anything I say as some medical directive for them. I really want people to honor themselves and do what's right for them in the right time and the right space. And I always like to warn people too, I'm going to talk about trauma today, and that might be a trigger for them. So again, you be the best judge for you if you're in a space to hear about that today, right? If you've already been through a day, it might not be the right time for you to hear about this. We therapists, we use a subjective unit of distress, which is basically like a pain scale. If you're walking into a hospital and they ask you how much pain you're in, they'll say 0 to 10. So if it's an emotional pain scaling, right? So 0 is completely peaceful. 1, 2, 3, fine. 4, 5, 6, we're starting to, lift the weight. But 7, 8, 9, 10, we're really in a space where we don't need anything else to add.
Right.
We're in a space where we can't really even hear correctly. So, we do have to lift the weight. So if you view, strengthening your brain and your mental health, like going to the mental health gym, we do have to get uncomfortable. So 4, 5, 6, we do have to grow and learn. But 8, 9, 10 is where we re-traumatize ourselves, right? So that's why I go, look, if the day has already been hard and you're in an 8, 9, 10, you might not want to listen today. You can wait until a day that you're in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then press the listen button.
Love that. I'm glad you said that. And I often, there's some episodes where I go deeper with my own kind of journey, or people I've interviewed go deeper with theirs. And that is always something in the back of my mind. Like, I don't want this to impact somebody negatively. So that's an amazing way that you just described that it's, if today's not the day, find another day, or there's something else to listen to. That's great. Which I think brings us, is a good segue into, I'm pretty comfortable with what trauma did to me. But can you just in general talk about what trauma, like what it does, especially unprocessed trauma, what does that do to our body, and how does that impact us physically?
I really appreciate the question. I've been on a number of podcasts. Nobody asked me that yet. So thank you.
I have the benefit. I read Bessel van der Kolk's book, Body Keeps the Score. So it is, if you haven't read that, read that one after you read Transforming Trauma with Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the plug. Look, we have a nervous system, right? And it's there to help keep us safe in this world. And it operates in 2 different ways, right? We have parasympathetic nervous system, and that is our rest, digest. There's no threat in the room. We're conserving energy. We're healing. We're sending energy to our reproductive organs, to our digestive organs, to our healing, to our filtering organs. This is something that we all need to do, right? Parasympathetic nervous system is really there for your fight or flight. Now, I need to keep myself safe. So I redirect all of that energy to my ability to fight. So I'm not digesting, I'm not resting, I'm not healing, I'm not any of these things, okay? And so that way that I have the energy I need to get away from the danger, okay? So, in that instance, that subjective unit of distress I was just describing a second ago, right? I'm potentially going to be an 8, 9, 10. There's a lion in the room, according to my brain, right? So I better be ready to fight, to run, to go do the thing, right? And so I might actually begin losing blood flow to certain parts of my brain, my prefrontal cortex, that I need to be able to think, and I'm sinking down into my limbic brain. So I like to use a lot of metaphor. Let's pretend right now that I'm in a car accident, okay? I'm going to be worried about my safety, not about changing the oil, right? Do I need to get out of the car? I'm not going to be cleaning things up. Okay, so this sympathetic nervous system is supposed to only be activated during emergency situations, okay? But it can go haywire, especially if you've collected a number of triggers, and I'll talk in a minute about triggers and how we collect them. And you do that long enough, and all of a sudden, that subjective unit of distress, so I encounter something that's stressful, I'm going to go to 8, 9, 10, and I'm going to stay there longer. I'm going to go there faster. It's going to take me longer to come down, even after the threat is gone. So imagine, right? We're more and more time in that and less time in the healing and the resting and all of that, okay? So let's pretend now that, our neighbor, we got in this car accident. We already have that problem, right? So the head is already sort of like, oh, I'm not sure about cars. I'm feeling, a little sensitive to driving now. And then our neighbor in a red car decides that they're going to do demolition derby with us every time we leave the house. We would become vigilant before we even got in the car,
Right.
our brain would be going, right? And we again wouldn't be noticing even when we got in the car, the engine light, because we would be too busy being hypervigilant outside of the vehicle, right? And then all the red cars might become a thing that we're afraid of too, because who knows? Maybe it's only lunatics that drive red cars, right? This is how the brain works. It's trying to protect us. So it's running, all the adrenaline and cortisol, and longer periods of adrenaline and cortisol, and less of the healing and the resting and everything that we need. Okay. So let me now add to that with a description of the limbic brain. So we've got our frontal lobe, which is all our strategic thinking, right? All of our ability to kind of put the story together and make good decisions. And unfortunately, all of the sensory input that you and I are receiving right now through our eyes, our sense of smell, our hearing, our sense of touch, all of that is coming in through a section of our brain called the limbic brain. And the limbic brain only has two buckets, pleasure or threat. It doesn't have an in-between space.
Right.
And it doesn't, it's either lying in the room or not lying in the room. I mean, your discussion with a friend that's uncomfortable becomes the lying in the room. Okay. Here's the problem. So many problems with limbic brain. All of those sensory pieces are coming in like puzzle pieces. Okay. So right now you have a view of me. Okay. Maybe a puzzle piece is the curly hair, right? The puzzle piece is my shirt. Puzzle piece is this blue thing over here. A puzzle piece is the sound of my voice. A puzzle piece is the movements I'm making. Puzzle piece is the temperature in your room. Okay. They're all just puzzle pieces floating in. They're not connected. All that information has to go over to the frontal lobe to be put together into a coherent story, right? And unfortunately, if the bridge between limbic and frontal lobe becomes activated, so we're in 8, 9, 10, we're activating all these systems. We need to stay safe. It's not time to process. So that little bridge can become the 405 at 5 o'clock. If you're familiar with California, you're in a traffic jam and things can get stuck. They don't get up to here. So you've got a partial picture and it's even partially formulated. Okay. The other problem with limbic brain is it doesn't have any speech connected to it. So if anything gets stuck back there, we can't even necessarily describe it because our speech functions up here. This part of the brain also has no sense of time. It doesn't know what happened today or 20 years ago. It doesn't know what happened before, during, and after. It doesn't have a timeline. It's all just floating puzzle pieces. It needs to get up to this other part of the brain to be put together. So there's no coherence of a story. So it's often why a lot of survivors of traumas are not good reporters. They might flip-flop back and forth on like, wait, did this happen first or this or this or this? Because it's just puzzle pieces floating around. So I'll give you another metaphor. Say I lost my mind. I punched you in the face. Okay. No particular reason. I broke your nose. Okay.
Okay.
Your brain very much could become activated, like, especially since this is a surprise. We're not sparring or something like this, right?
Right.
All this stuff is coming in through here. And you happen to be eating an orange at the time that I punched you. Okay. You're activated. Some stuff gets across here and you're like, okay, yeah, now all curly haired people are insane. I just heard. Okay. So some of it gets over to the frontal lobe, but let's say the orange doesn't. You could be in a room 20 years from now and be sitting in that room and somebody's eating an orange and you don't even consciously notice the orange, but you just know that you're starting to feel uncomfortable. What in the hell is that? I need to get out of here. Sorry for I talk like a pirate. I got to work on it.
That's fine. Totally fine.
But you know you need to get out of that room, but you don't even know why. And that's one of the magic things about EMDR, because it helps unlock some of those oranges and bring them to the frontal lobe so that we can begin to process and put the story back together. Okay. That's one of the magics of jiu-jitsu, which we'll get into, later, in that you could be in a particular position with somebody and all of a sudden it awakens that orange. And who knows what it is? It actually could be the smell of their deodorant. It could be the fact that they're holding in their wrist. Who knows what that orange is? But you could see all the hazards in this, right? Of like all the sensory information and which piece got stuck or pieces. So if this is how our body and our brain operate, you could see that if we become hypervigilant over time and we're not resting or digesting, all of a sudden the cancer fighting cells are not doing what they're supposed to do, right? It just becomes a problem. And look, if you don't believe me, whoever, go look up the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study. It is a study that Kaiser conducted, and it has more people in it than any study in the history of mental health studies. There's over 18,000 patients in that study for a very long time now. I think it's over a decade.
Wow.
And what they discovered is that they can ask you 10 questions, mental health questions, that will determine how young you're going to die. Wow. From all the causes that we already typically die from, whether that be heart disease or cancer or whatever. And those 10 questions are things like, were you beaten, by your parents? Were your parents divorced? Did one of your parents go to prison? Or they're alcoholics in your family, right? All kinds of things we'd expect. But it surprises me sometimes that there's one question in there that specifically says, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? That would actually shorten your lifespan. Anyway, I hope I'm doing a good job of answering your question, but right, like if you don't believe it's physical, go look up the results of that ACE study. It's physical. We don't just record trauma up here. We have a body memory. Everybody knows what muscle memory is. Oh, we have it. There are stories here, right? If we got burned by that stove, we don't have to think about not touching it. We know. As soon as that's warm, we pull our hand back, right? Yeah. But then unfortunately, that may not serve us. And it may cause us a whole lot of adrenaline and cortisol that we don't need over the long run. And that's not going to keep you healthy. So does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think about my own kind of path through this. And just hearing you say that, the way all of that cortisol and in law enforcement, when I was doing EMDR for something else, for a big event, there was a couple of big things that finally got me to go get things sorted out. But while I was doing those with the EMDR, all this other stuff,
oh, you bet,
that I didn't even think was a big deal. Just bad calls I'd gone to that I just was like, nope, that's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. All of that stuff was coming back, and I was like, what the heck is going on? And it's those puzzle pieces that I didn't have the rest of the puzzle for, that hadn't ever been processed, and I just stuffed them down. And I think the best night's sleep I have ever had is after a good EMDR session. And I don't know why, but I think about the impact of all of that cortisol over time, and all of that just weight over time I wish. I wish I had figured it. I wish I had figured it out at the academy, because I'd probably be a lot better off.
I wish that we would teach this kind of thing in our high school psychology courses. Right now, I'm trying not to swear. They are history lessons on Freud.
Cops listen to this. You're not going to offend anybody.
Yeah, they're fucking history lessons. I'm sorry, and I don't need a history lesson. I need teenagers to have tools and understand how their brain works. This world would be a better place.
Yeah.
If we knew how our brains work and don't work. We're very sophisticated up here, but back here, we're literally not much better than a lizard.
Right.
And if you sink down in that part of your brain, you are not hearing, you are not understanding, you are re-traumatizing yourself, which is why it's so important that, people that want to do jiu-jitsu, that they do it if they have a history of trauma in the right way, and that the instructors are doing it in the right way with them too, because you could very much make that trauma bigger too. And we'll potentially get into that.
Yeah. So the act of processing that stuff is, if that has, so let's say that car crash you talked about, or the punch to the face that you talked about, that happens, and then so you punch me in the face, I'm traumatized. Instead of waiting until I smell an orange 20 years later in a room, or whatever it is about the orange, if I go and process that, whether it's with EMDR or some other modality,
Yeah.
does that limits the impact on the body?
So here's where it gets tricky. So everybody's different.
Right.
Some people don't get as activated. So they may be able to process this without much assistance at all. If I have grown up in a household where I'm checking all those ACE boxes,
yep.
I have potentially something called complex trauma. And if I have complex trauma, I have all kinds of landmines, right? It's going to be harder for me to easily process this. We also have a particular genetic code for stuff like this, right? So from one person to the next, it depends. I personally would love for everybody to be able to do some art therapy at a minimum, like draw it out what happened, and we can get into that later. It's not about being an artist. This could be stick figures. It doesn't even have to be stick figures. It could be circle represents this person, square represents this person, the arrows were the conflict, whatever, but something that helps our brain pull up those puzzle pieces and put the story together so that we can see it clearly, so that nothing gets stuck. And if we're not able to do that, then tools like EMDR that can help calm down the emotional part of our brain and allow us to bring up all those pieces to do it is necessary, right? So everybody's different in terms of what they require and how much support they require. I mean, I've heard of these like grandma benches they have that were inspired, or maybe they are in Africa, but they were inspired by African traditions and community where in some of the community, and Africa's an entire continent. I wish I could give you an exact country, but people would easily go talk to the grandma. Everybody knew. Right. You go, and when you're having a hard time, you talk to grandma. That might do the trick, as right. You feel that person's a safe place for you, and it calms down your limbic brain enough that you can start, letting all the puzzle pieces up. Perfect. Everybody's solution doesn't have to look the same. This is me saying, though, if you're having nightmares, if you can't work, if you're not sleeping, if you've got intrusive thoughts that you're not trying to have pop up, if you're more agitated, if you can't think, you probably have some processing you need to do. So start, climbing up that ladder of, if you want to talk to your religious leader, do you want to talk to just a friend, all the way to right therapist or whoever.
Yeah, and I think recognizing those cues, the whatever, whether it's lack of sleep or that the negative voice is just like no the whole time. All of that stuff is, I didn't recognize it, and it wasn't until later in my career in law enforcement where we even talked about it. And the stigma obviously is a big part of that, and that's a whole episode on stigma.
Don't even get me.
Yeah. And it's not just cops, obviously. It's, I think, stigma with, varies in different demographics, but it's recognizing those things and knowing who you're, what's causing that is a big piece of it, and an important piece.
Well, it makes it even harder to do what we're trying to do in the processing, because look, the safer you feel in therapy and the more vulnerable you can get in a controlled way is how we're allowing that to come up. And EMDR is a very vulnerable process sometimes of like allowing your brain to just go wherever it needs to go. And at the same time, I love how your therapist explained it too, that, you don't necessarily have to tell me all the details of what's coming up for you.
Right.
You can just tell me whether your number's going up and down or whether we're going in the right direction, physically what you're sensing, if, the negative cognition is moving towards positive, do we need an interject? But I don't need the details. It does its trick all by itself. That bilateral stem.
I call it voodoo magic.
I know. I loved when you call it voodoo magic.
It's the only way I can make it make sense. So what was, I think I know based on what you've said, but what was the inspiration of for you and Jamie to get together and write the book, which I'm going to hold up again because people need to see it.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it's in the book, so bear with me if you have to hear it again because you might have already
That's
read
fine. I've read it.
Look, I was training for quite a while, and like a lot of students who were training for a while, the instructor might call you up to demonstrate something, right? And a lot of instructors were doing this with me, and no problem. I don't like the spotlight, but I could handle it. There was one instructor, though, in particular that I couldn't get away from fast enough. I wasn't listening to anything he was saying. He over and over, he's like, Anna, listen to my voice. And I'm like, bah! Just couldn't. Sloppy. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is wrong with me? Like, Anna, relax, calm down. I'm trying to talk myself down. And so it's one of those things in the middle of the night, I'm like, and it finally hits me. Okay. And I'm a seasoned client of therapy myself. So I feel like I've done my work. I'm good. I don't need anything else. Right. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, no. So I'm opening Facebook and yet there his picture is. I'm like, he looks like somebody from my past.
Oh, yep.
And as soon as I saw this guy's picture, I was flooded. My body was uncomfortable, all the icky, sticky, angry, enraged, trapped, not okay, like everything came flooding back. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, this is like 30 years ago, trauma brain. What are you doing?
That's the orange. Me? That's the orange you were talking about.
Yeah, there was oranges in the room. And all he does is look like him. He doesn't sound like him. He hasn't been disrespectful to me. He hasn't done anything like that. So I reach out to them because I'm curious, I mean, although I'm a trauma therapist, they may have a new information for me. So I reach out to him and his wife and say, what do you do when people are triggered? Because I'm sure you've encountered this before. And she sends me back the most amazing response. Oh my gosh, thank you for entrusting us with letting us know that you're encountering this. And she said, everybody's different, what you need. So this is Hannah Gracie who's triggering me. And she says to me, do you want more energy or less energy? Do you want no contact with him? What do you want? And I'm like, you know what? Let Henner be Henner. I've got to figure this out. So I take a pre-test for my pink belt. What they have, their women's self-defense program there, right?
Yep.
And I'm solid that I'm going to get close to 100. Like, I know these things inside. I have memorized. I sit there at night in my bed, making the moves, right? But then I say to them, I'm like, can I test with him? And he doesn't normally test people, but they were gracious enough to say, sure, you can test with him. So he walks into the room and I'm like, back up, and that's one of our techniques. Right. He's like, do you want to get a sip of water? And I'm like, no, get it over with. And I'm like super upset. I mean, we haven't even done anything. Anyway, there comes a technique in there and I literally black out for a second. I'm hitting him.
Wow.
Instead of doing trap and roll.
Right. Right.
And he's shaking me and he's got his hands on my neck. He's like, oh no, you know this. And I come to, and then I do the thing and somehow I manage to pass the test. But here's the moment. So I get out, I pass my test, and I instinctively open up that Facebook picture afterwards. And as if he could hear me, I say to his photo on the screen, I'm like, you can't hurt me anymore. I'm not afraid of you. And I forgive you. And that's when I went, whoa.
Yep.
Because I have read tons of books for my clients on trying to find forgiveness, trying to let it go so we don't have to be upset anymore. And I realized in that moment, this whole thing was just an intellectual discussion up here that didn't involve the body, that had its own memories and was not interested in forgiving anyone if it had to continue to be vigilant to protect against them. And until I had answers, until I could bring all those puzzle pieces together with answers, it wasn't going to forgive anyone.
Right.
It was going to continue to ring. So anyway, I'm on fire. I'm like, oh my God, I want this for every trauma client I've ever met. And I had to calm myself down. Okay, it's not for everybody, Anna, even though you think it is. And then it wasn't long after that, one of my clients, because I used to be the therapist sort of on call at a men's sober living. And it happened to be that the owner of that sober living was a black belt at Crone Gracie. And so he had all the guys training there. And one of my clients was like, Anna, you have to see this video. And the video was Jamie talking about her trauma healing. So next day, I'm like, hi, you don't know me, but if you want to do anything together ever about this, please call me. North Atlantic Books had her write, I want to say 10 books before this one on all kinds of subjects. And they had actually sought her to write the book. Mm-hmm. She reached out to me because she wasn't training any longer. And so she wanted somebody who was still on the mats to co-write this with her. And so that's it. And by the way, I knew, and I was told by her and numerous others, that this was not a money-making situation. I wasn't going to get rich off of writing a book. Right. And that I actually would lose quite a bit of money in terms of time and energy writing it, but that I would have an impact potentially. I might help people. And I said, I'm in. Yep. I'm in. I don't need fame or money. I don't even need my name attached to it, but I want to leave a legacy of healing. That, I made my positive mark, and someday when I have to go, I'll be like, all right, I'm good. So anyway, that's the book.
Yeah. And it is definitely, it helped me, and I've let a few other people borrow it and read it, and it helped them. And it's, I'm hoping to wear this one out a little more and share it around.
Thank you.
That moment with Henner, where you get to kind of unleash whatever. You passed all the stuff, barring the forgetting the trap and roll and doing all of that. What is it about that moment, or jiu-jitsu in general, that makes those things and helps people overcome trauma or whatever that's like? What is jiu-jitsu doing in that moment that is so powerful?
So, again, like I said a couple of minutes before, we have muscle memory. We all have muscle memory, for better or worse. We usually, when we refer to that, as good muscle memory, like training for sports or something. Right. But we also have the other. Our body has its own memory of situations. Even with that parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, it's sort of a back and forth communication between the body and the brain, right, of where we're at any given moment. And so there are stories stored in our body. And if we are not in charge of them, they will be in charge of us. And like I said, that limbic brain is less than optimal sometimes, right? And so the body's sending messages to limbic brain and back, and there's potentially oranges in there. And if those oranges are stuck and we can't see them, and now we're on the mats in jiu-jitsu, some sort of sensory input might come in to unlock one of those oranges. And by the way, that orange could be affecting us. And again, we have no idea.
Right.
Hard for us to spot. And once it's unlocked, once it's accessible, we might begin to process it. Okay? It's our limbic brain job to protect us. And so until this threat can be neutralized and we have some answers for it, it's not interested in letting go. It's not interested in de-escalating. It would prefer hypervigilance. We need to have vigilance. Right. It's not a safe world. Okay. But we don't need hypervigilance, because the hypervigilance leads us back to all the cortisol and adrenaline and everything else that's going to kill us. Right. And so we're not going to be able to get rid of the hyper unless we can unlock those oranges. And being on the mats, I've been told over and over again, there was a woman who reached out to me she's an instructor, and I think she'd been training for 10 or 15 years. No problems. And all of a sudden one day she has a complete panic attack on the mats. Not even sure why. And I'm like, oh, orange popped up.
Yep.
So she unlocked it. It's now accessible. And once it's accessible, we can do something with it versus it being hidden in the background. And again, if we're not in charge of the story's in charge of us. And so we want to rewrite that story with the body and the brain. And if we're able to do that, then, I've also heard in the research that Jamie and I did with the graduates of the Women's Empowered program, that let's say a woman had been raped. She's walking down the street and a man is walking down the sidewalk towards her. He's a potential rapist.
Right.
And all of a sudden, after these women did this training, he was just a man.
Yeah.
Because they had been able to unlock, it had popped up, they see it, right? And then they're able to deal with it. You know, we could probably get into a 10-hour lecture of all the reasons why jiu-jitsu can help. I'm trying to think of another. So I'll give you another example in a minute with the next question I think you're going to ask me here. But does that, what I just said, make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I've heard, you know, the go-to answer I've heard from a lot of people, just not people who, you know, are mental health professionals or anything, but it's you're so in the moment that you can't think about anything else, which I think there is some truth to that. But I think that is also undervaluing what is really going on. And I like that how you explained, like, you're unlocking, but I'm curious if the trauma isn't tied to, I mean, I guess it's always tied to something physical, but if it's not tied to something that physically happened to a person, it's still a puzzle piece. It's still an orange in there. How, like, what is it doing in that moment? Because to me, that's even more voodoo magic, because it's not like you punched me in the face and my face, I had pain in my face or whatever. There was some other, that mental toll you talked about where you were in a home, you know, a child who was in a home that wasn't loved or appreciated, however you describe that more eloquently than I just did. But that kind of mental trauma is still also impacted by jiu-jitsu. I don't know why.
Let me, if you don't mind, jump to your next question, because I think I'm going to give you a pretty good example of how it might not even be a punch to the face, right? It could be something else that you even totally benefit from. Do you mind if I state that question?
Go for it.
So you wanted to know what does trauma-informed jiu-jitsu look like?
Right.
Right? And what kind of steps an academy can implement. Look, I've been giving 2-day, 10-hour trainings to even begin to scratch the surface on that one, because there's so many different aspects to consider, from, you know, how you approach a triggered student, to the content considerations for new students, to communication on the mats. And I'll get to your question in just a second here, that overlaps between the two. But the first thing I would, if I had to only, you know, share with you 3 things today, the first thing I would say is that trauma is done in a way in which we don't have a choice about it. It's not like we wake up and go, oh, I want to be traumatized today.
Yeah.
Right? And so the opposite of that is choice. And so if you're at a old school, and by the way, I have no disrespect for them. I train kendo as well. And it's a very old school, traditional school where, you know, you do all the bowing, you don't disobey, you listen to exactly what the instructor's saying any given time. You don't just walk on and off out of the dojo. That's fine. Not everybody has to worry about trauma survivors or needs to cater to them. And though, if they do care about that, then I would encourage them to make sure there's choice, that they can walk off the mats, and that's not a big deal. Okay? A lot of us trauma therapists, we like exposure therapy, right? We want to send our clients to the mental gym. It's not about avoiding men because you were raped by a man.
Right.
It's about learning to tolerate that and figure out that it's okay. Right. And so if even getting to the jiu-jitsu mats is going to get me to 8, 9, 10, I have to be very careful about how I even get you through the door. And oftentimes when clients are asking my help, it's usually just that. They just need to get through the door. Once they get through the door, they're fine. But there are people that are on the mats and, like, they don't want to do every technique. And so, for example, if you put them in a triad, it's easier for them to sit out on a technique than if they're just in a pair. Because if I'm in a pair, I'm now making my partner sit out of the technique as well. Yep. So there's little things like that you could consider, especially if you know that you're treating a group of people that have this, right? And so, again, I'm emphasizing choice, okay, wherever we can. So the point number 2 here, and I've never talked about this before because it actually just came up for me recently. So here goes. And I've talked about what I'm about to, you'll see in a second, but I don't need jiu-jitsu instructors to be therapists. Okay. Right. I don't need you to be an expert in what I do, just the way I don't want to be a jiu-jitsu instructor either. At least right now, we'll see. But I do think it's super helpful for them to have a basic understanding of trauma so that they could understand and spot behavior. Okay. I really believe in my heart of hearts that misunderstanding and miscommunication is a significant cause of majority of our world problems.
Yeah.
And the more that we can understand one another, the better this place is going to be. So I'll give you an example that, again, I really haven't shared too much about. A recent triggering. And I would say that I have a belt promotion aversion or phobia. And, even when back in 2018, when I thought there was a chance I was getting my blue belt, I simply didn't go to the belt ceremony, hoping to avoid this thing.
Right.
Right. And unfortunately, they brought the belt to the class next day and wrapped it around my waist. And as he did it, I felt nothing but nausea. I wanted to run and cry, and not in a happy way. But I put it in my head that, this is just me. I don't like the spotlight, and I also had set with clients who literally were suicidal because Crone Gracie hadn't given them a belt in 10 years. And I'm like, F the belt. I don't need belts. Belts are not for me,
Right.
Whatever to the promotions and all that. I'm not going to be a part of that. It's unhealthy. So I was like, okay, that's why I am spazzing out here. No problem. So I try to ignore that. And that was 2018. So 8 years ago. So a few months ago, I'm now getting my 3rd stripe on my belt. And I couldn't help myself. I think I said something to the effect of, I'll peel it off when I get home or something, as the instructor's putting it on my belt. And it didn't even occur to me. It didn't even occur to me that this would be disrespectful to him.
Right.
And rude. And I didn't even, because I love this instructor. There's no way I would ever disrespect him. And of course he got irritated. He's like, what in the, I'll take it off for you right now. Da, 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 da. And I'm just standing there like, oh my God, what's happening? Right. So he puts it on and I'm like, okay, time to go back to the therapist, Anna. Time for some more psychoanalysis to peel back another layer of trauma. And I literally, with her help, filled an entire single space typed page of reasons and trauma connections to this moment. So I'm just going to share with you one. Okay. And this is hopefully going to tell you more about even the non-physical trauma stuff. Although there is some physical in here, but it's not directly related. And I want to say that sometimes when people share trauma stories, they don't make sense. Like the average person listening to them is like, oh my God, no way that happened. Right. Yeah, it happened. Trauma, especially complex trauma, doesn't make sense. It's often incomprehensible why people would do things like this, which leaves the trauma survivor not believed. And so it's a risk right now for me to even share what I'm about to share.
Right.
So I had one parent who was hell-bent that the only purpose in life as a child was to achieve academically. Okay? And if you didn't get straight A's, there was no reason for anything else. Everything else was a waste of time. Any sports, anything. Okay? And if you got distracted with that, you were actually going to be punished. Keep in mind, this is a parent with a significant trauma history of her own. Okay? Right. Generational trauma. And until somebody breaks the chain, it's just going to keep going on and on, right? My other step parent took me skiing, and I did extraordinarily well, and he was super proud of me. So he bought me a pair of skis, which for us was an enormous deal because we were very poor, and the expenditure of even going skiing, let alone buying a pair of skis, was a thing. So much so that, I literally had 2 pairs of sweatpants and a couple t-shirts in high school. And I remember I had my brother take 2 Polaroid pictures of me with my skis because I was just so excited about these skis.
I love that you said Polaroid. Sorry.
Yeah. Don't you love that? No, they're back in style now.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the first times anybody was ever proud of me. I was stoked. I think I was about 14 at the time. Anyway, this other parent comes home, discovers the skis, and she is enraged. She is screaming at me at the top of her lungs. What the hell do you think you deserve these? You're a piece of shit. I mean, punching me, hitting me, degrading me, endlessly pushing me into the wall while she's slapping me. And then she took the skis and she threw them outside onto the sidewalk where they cracked. And then she came back in, started hitting me again. And needless to say, I had been through many things prior to this incident, and probably 14 years of trauma exploded back onto her for the first time ever. And I blacked out. I don't even know exactly what I did. All I know is her body flew out of my room and down the stairs, and she was screaming at the top of her lungs.
Wow.
So the other parent comes, grabs me, throws me out of the house. So I leave, run away. I don't know what we'll call it. And a couple of days, I don't even know how many days. See, this is a trauma reporting that gets difficult, right? Because the timeline gets mixed up and exactly what's in pieces still. Anyway, I eventually come back home. And when I come home, my trophies are broken into pieces. My plaques are broken. My pictures, my posters, my prom dress, everything is in tiny little pieces on the floor in my room. And I basically looked up at my stepfather and said, it's not safe for me to stay here. I'm going to do something really bad. I'm afraid of myself.
Yeah.
So I left again to go live with my aunt for a while. So that's just some of the details of the story. Yep. But based on what I've already told you about the limbic brain, okay, you could say this story has nothing to do with a stripe going onto my belt. The hell does that have to do with that, right?
I have a theory,
but now, right? My limbic brain decided that if I do good in sports, I will be physically and emotionally assaulted and abused by the people that care about me. I will be abandoned and rejected. Right. And whatever symbols of those sports accolades I have earned will be destroyed.
Yeah.
There are potentially hundreds more of triggers stuck around this particular day and the others. And what's funny about it, one of the triggers of that day, my dad had these enormous hands. I always wish I had hands like his. And we describe his fingers are like just enormous. And his hands grabbed me and threw me out of the house that day. And the instructor that was putting that stripe on my belt has really big hands.
Yep.
So in that moment, I didn't see him. I didn't see all the work that me and everybody else had put in to get that stripe.
Yeah.
You know what I saw.
Right?
So here's the orange. It pops out. And so then I not only go back to my therapist to go, what in the heck is this about? Because I love this guy. I love my community. I don't want to be rude. We identify this. And then my individual therapist is like, okay, we got to make a plan. We need exposure therapy for you, EMDR, everything else. I need you to accept compliments, Anna. I'm like, oh, great. My favorite thing. Dang. She's like, if you get a compliment, I need you to sit still with it. I need you to notice that there's no threat. Just breathe. Look around. No threat. Nobody's going to smack you, hit you, tell you didn't deserve the compliment. And I need you to use all your tools, your grounding, all the rest of your stuff to gather a sense of safety right after the compliment to lower the adrenaline rush that is coming at you.
Yeah.
You might even need to do push-ups to like digest that, right? There's a lot of different tools that I use then to like figure this out. In addition, now every day when I go to class, I pick up my belt and I look at my stripes and I am trying to redefine them. What do they mean to me? What do they represent? You know what they represent? The love, blood, sweat, and tears of not only me, but my partners that have invested in me to get here. These represent love and care, nothing more, nothing less, which is the exact opposite of the hate that I received as a child for achieving the sports accolade.
Yeah, and you there's a lot of good stuff in there, but the narrative that got written in there, you have no control over that narrative. That's the trauma writes the narrative, and then you're left trying to figure out what that, like years later, Why am I upset that I'm getting a stripe? That is such a like.
And it's hidden.
Right.
It's hidden. So look, one of the things, so if I was advising a instructor on the mats, one of the things that I teach them is that, look, I can tell you about people who are shaky. You'll spot that, right? I could tell you about people whose eyes are dodging all over the room. They might be triggered, right? But one of the best indicators that somebody might be triggered is unusual behavior for that student.
Yep.
So this instructor knows I don't want to disrespect him. He knows how much I appreciate him. That was weird. And when Anna's behaving weird, something's
There's a
up.
reason. Yeah.
Right? So it's just one of the many things that instructors can learn so that they don't personalize weird behavior, that they can stop and go, hey, are you all right? I saw earlier, whatever. And again, he didn't do anything wrong. We're all learning together.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway, any questions about that before I name number 3?
I mean, I think it's interesting that, and you cover this in the book, but it's finding an instructor that is attuned to that behavior and knows what to look for, and it is, I think, a big piece of that figuring that out and navigating that as somebody who's training people, and everybody's bringing something different to the table. That's being attuned to what you're seeing, and those little nuanced reactions, I think, go a long way.
It's not easy, and if those instructors haven't processed their own junk, they're not going to be seeing it accurately either.
Right.
So then the third point, so I said I want choice on the mats. I want instructors who at least have a basic understanding of how trauma might show up. And then number 3, I want them to know, don't fix it. Just hold space. So like if you identify a student who is triggered, it's not your job to go over and fix it. Okay, you're safe. You're okay. Don't cry. Or go in for the hug, right? Or, all the stuff that we all grew up with. That's how we know how to take care of each other. But I'm telling you right now that, like, if you instruct somebody how to feel, that might be a trigger. If you give them some physical contact they didn't ask for in that moment, that might not be good, right? Yep. So instead we could do things like invite them, would a sip of water or some fresh air be helpful? Your feelings and everything are okay with me. And then just mirror. You don't need to solve. You can just say, wow, it sounds like that really sucked if they start sharing something. It sounds like, wow, I can imagine how upsetting that would be. This is, that's terrible. What do you need? And then you have like the list of, 3 therapists and their business cards are already available, in case you need support, they're over there.
Right.
Because I don't want them to feel like they have to now be the therapist on call. That's not... I mean, especially
because that's not their wheelhouse. That's. I mean, yeah.
Anyway, I have lots of tips on tricks when students are triggered too. So if instructors want a consultation or a training, please let me know. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, I'm going to put a bunch of stuff in the show notes. It's if you want people reaching you and how to get in touch. So, so then, how does someone like you, not we'll say you're not a jiu-jitsu practitioner at this point, you're just you're a therapist that somebody reaches out to, and somebody is like, I want, I heard on this great podcast that I should try jiu-jitsu for trauma, and how do you support them in that endeavor?
Okay, so look, we, at least in the state of California, every state's different. We in the state of California have to be using evidence-based practices. And unfortunately, there isn't a crap ton of research right now with control versus not control studies and things that they would consider evidence-based. So this is still on the cutting edge in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So, for my own safety's sake with my license, I try everything else first.
Yep.
Okay, I need to make sure that we have done our due diligence in helping you before you're on the mats. And then once I feel like, okay, no, you want to do this thing. All right. Let's first of all, make sure that you're real clear on that subjective unit of distress that we talked about before, that scale.
Yep.
There are a crap ton of people out there couldn't even name their number.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would say especially men sometimes, and especially first responders who are trained not to feel, just to do a thing. It's not, you don't sit there, he has a gun. Let me see how I feel about it. So you're not sitting there figuring out your number. But unfortunately, if you don't know how to read that, you won't know when you're really going to the gym at the 4, 5, 6 level and growing versus you being in there at 8, 9, 10 and re-traumatizing yourself. So it's key to me that you understand that subjective unit of distress before we do anything.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, I love that people create a toolbox of things for them that help them move that number up and down. Because if I know that you're getting it a 7 and you might even keep climbing based on the things we talked about earlier with the limbic brain, even if you stop, it may keep climbing. I need to know that we can get that number back down. And if you've hired me to even be in the room, I need to know which tools you love.
Right.
Right. I got to know the toolbox so I can be there for you. Right. And so, yeah, fill it up. Grounding, progressive muscle relaxation, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, music, pictures, friends, right? Bring them with you to those first session, whatever, but I need a toolbox. Yep. And then if I had my druthers, which is not always possible, I love it if they're able to do individual training so that we can literally customize a desensitization plan. So for example, if I know that part of the assault you suffered involves somebody choking you, I'm probably not going to start there. Right? Right? That's not going to be day 1 training. I jump on you and like,
how's this?
How's that feel?
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm going to pick and choose jiu-jitsu techniques, because just getting you through the door might be enough, where you get to begin to feel out releasing their grips and things like this. You might actually see other people doing some trap and rolls and things and then decide when you want to participate. I'm going to build a plan and collaborate with the instructor to create a plan. And then I demonstrate, finally this. And even in that, like in my school, they do a great job of going, when you first do the technique, we might just put our hands here, right?
Right.
We're not going to actually put our hands on the neck. And then you decide when you want hands on the neck. And then you decide when you want to be squeezed.
Yeah.
And you decide at what intensity. Again, choice. Right?
Yep.
So I create this plan, the toolbox, I create the plan, and then I want to work to really empower their voice. So now I'm releasing them out onto the general mats. I need them to be able to say, hey, I need to go light today. Hey, I think I'm going to sit out of this. Right? All kinds of jiu-jitsu language where they get to like hold their boundary. And then I'll even have them practice it. I'm like, whether you feel that way or not, let's just practice using those words and sitting out. Because look, I know from Eve Gracie that she said the hardest technique for women to master in their self-defense program there is the stop block frame. And stop block frame is somebody's approaching you at a gas station, you're all by yourself, and your ability to go, hey, stop right there.
Yep.
And myself included, when I first learned this, I'm like, hey, stop there. No command, no body posture, no projection of voice, right? I mean, we are trained, especially as women, to, don't be a bitch. Like,
right.
He may not want nothing from you. Why are you telling him to stop right there? Like, why are you crazy? So empowering voice, especially for trauma survivors who have often had their voice dismissed, squashed, didn't matter. Like it's really important. And they often need to practice it. They need to literally role play situations where somebody's going too hard and what are they going to say?
Yep.
Hey, I need to take a breath. I'm going to pause for a minute, whatever, and know that that's okay. And so the third thing I would also have the clinician do is work with the person to pick the right school for them.
Yep.
There's lots of different schools do different things in different ways. And again, I'm not anti-competitive gym, but there's some cautions around that. Can you handle that? Right. And so I have 4 different lists that I like people to refer to. One is a list for clinicians to vet instructors. Are they open to talking about trauma? Do they know anything about it? Have they ever seen a triggered student? How did they handle it? On and on and on and on. Yep. Then I have a list for sort of just general what I would seek in a gym. Okay. Then I have what I would expect from a trauma-informed gym. And then I have a 4th list of my wishes for the future. Anyway, you can scour the book looking for this stuff. But then I've put it all into like checklists for people that come to my trainings. In the very back of the book, as you might be aware, is the general list.
Yep.
So it's a good starting place. And not everybody's going to need the trauma-informed or the trauma-informed best practice.
Right.
Some people will need more support than others, like we talked about before, depending if they have complex trauma or they just have this, shouldn't say adjust, they have one incident in their adult life with their fully formed brain, right, is different than a child going through something at the hands of their caretaker and ongoing.
Right.
Right. But anyway, does that answer that question?
Yeah, and it strikes me that I used to tell, before I retired, I would tell newer cops, like, if you're like, I was encouraging people, go talk to somebody if you need to, like, that's not a big deal, but you have to, I think finding the right therapist, it's also important to find the right place to train, because, and it might be that, it might be a communication thing, or it could be that they're not attuned to, so I think it's as important to find the right culture at a gym, the right instructor, the right training partners. All of that stuff is equally important to finding the right therapist. And I think all of that, when all of that lines up, it's a fabulous outcome. I mean, I would like it to be a fabulous outcome for people.
I would too. And I don't know, I hope people don't misunderstand me. Again, I'm not anti the competitive gyms. I'm not anti the traditional ones. I like my kendo dojo as it is.
Right.
Right? I don't need them to walk on eggshells around me and my trauma. If I have a problem, I can take it outside of that. Which isn't to say that, like, I might like a trauma-informed kendo dojo. Okay, then I probably shouldn't have gone to the one where they were training the Olympians, which I
Right.
stumbled on by mistake and wondered, why am I wanting to throw up in these trainings? Like, okay, that's why. But anyway, it's right. I don't know. I feel like some people are frustrated with me because of some of the things that I want these gyms to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, but I think you said earlier, like, figuring all of that stuff out, like you helping somebody figure out all of the ways to say, I need a break, or I want to go sit this one out. All of that doesn't mean that that you're stuck there forever. You can maybe progress and go, okay, good, now I'm comfortable. Maybe I want to go to the competition gym now, or so like,
right.
You're not, I think it's important. You're not stuck in that,
right.
in that situation permanently. You can evolve, and like what my therapist called it, post-traumatic growth. Like it's a,
mm-hmm.
I'm trying to pick up terms here and there, but I think that's important to remember too. Like, you can grow in your recovery and figure, oh, maybe I can do this now and I couldn't do this before. And that's a big part of it.
Exactly. Which then leads me to maybe share with you a couple more things that's what I would want from the therapist. But then if I could talk to the gym instructors,
yep.
Again, I think there's 30 things on my list of the general list of things that I would look for. But, again, I try to give like 3 top things when I'm talking to people. And the very first one that I have is that safety is emphasized. That, instructors are explicitly stating how to keep each other safe. Because let's face it. I mean, this could be a dangerous sport if people are not telling you, we need the bad guy to tuck his fingers before you roll. Now they've got busted fingers.
Right.
And, people on the street, I feel like it's almost impossible to know that you need to do that, especially if they go quick. So I'm looking for dojos where you hear the instructor literally say, right, to avoid injury or for your safety, do this. And then I like instructors too that say tap early. Like, I don't need you to get choked out and pass out to learn how to do this. And as a matter of fact, the more times you're choked out, the easier it gets. So,
right.
I don't need that for you either. I love one of the things that one of my favorite instructors does is on certain days and certain times, he instructs us even in sparring, once you get to that level, is to catch and release. He calls them submission-free diet days.
Yep.
And I'm like, why not? Because the hardest part of it is typically getting to the position in which you could even submit. So why do I now have to like crank your arm back for what satisfaction, really, to see how quick you can tap?
Right.
So anyway, I'm not trying to collect more trauma for my trauma survivors. So safety has to be number 1. Number 2, I don't believe in sparring day one. And I know I feel like I got into a bit of a disagreement with my last podcast interviewer over this. And he's like, well, some people have a wrestling background, or they come from a military background. And I'm like, yeah, those military guys, they may have some stuff.
Yeah.
And now you got a blacked out guy who feels like he's somewhere where he's not.
Right.
He could hurt somebody else and then come out of it and be horrified that he hurt somebody.
Yeah.
So I don't want people sparring on day one. I'm sorry. I'm not going to apologize for that. I feel like it's asking somebody to play chess and you haven't told them how the different characters move. Like, I remember that was one of the scariest parts of my blue belt. When I had the combatives belt, like we do at my school, and you've passed their street fighting protocol. I remember a guy telling me, he was grabbing my foot, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about the foot locks yet. And he's like, oh, don't worry, I won't really go for it until you're blue belt.
You're great.
And I'm like, okay, they clearly don't want a blue belt. But it's all right. And also don't get me wrong that there's a difference between just open sparring and technical sparring. I'm not against technical sparring, right? Where they teach you here's the lock and here's the defense. Try going back and forth, over time.
Yep.
But I don't want them sparring first day. Sorry. And then number 3 is sport versus street. Look, I think there's a bunch of people out there that are going to this for self-defense. They want to know that if they get into a street fight that they will know what they need to know. And if you're not telling me specifically what is street and what is sport, I could, I don't know, try butterfly guard. Some kind of street fight. I'm in trouble. So I want that stuff explicitly named so they, again, choice. They have awareness, they have information, and then they can make choice. If I had my druthers, I'd even separate those two, right? For those of us that just want to concentrate on self-defense, these are the jiu-jitsu techniques that are most street applicable.
Right.
I know that almost all of them can be in certain situations and whatever, right? But we all know that, like, again, I don't know, butterfly spider, something like that. Like, come on now. Right. So just be upfront with me. And I think a lot of problems can be avoided. So
yeah, that makes
I hope
sense.
If you'll let me know if you disagree.
No, I mean, I think I train with a pretty small group, and it's I'm really only in the law enforcement only class, and everybody knows everybody, and nobody is trying to take an arm home with them so that somebody can't go to work the next day. And everybody's got a different comfort level, but I agree with you in the sense that if you don't know where somebody's coming from and you just throw somebody on the mat and hope for the best without the safety conversation, without all of these things in place, it can certainly go bad. And there's a lot of risk built into there, especially, then you throw trauma into the mix and it just gets that much more complicated. So.
Yeah, I mean, if they're in their 8, 9, 10, they're literally not here.
Right.
They're not hearing anymore. They're not understanding anymore. Like, even you're like, hey, stop. They may not hear it. Right.
Well, or they may not be able to tap or verbalize tap or
Exactly.
any of that stuff. They're in freeze instead of fight or flight, and they're stuck there, and then they got a broken arm because you didn't know you were there. But yeah, it's
right.
There's a lot there. There's a lot to that for sure. So I want to be respectful of your time. You also do art. You're a registered art therapist, and when I was kind of thinking about that, and you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, are there similarities with how that makes the puzzle pieces kind of get sorted out with art therapy, similar to jiu-jitsu?
Exactly. So all of this information has been brought into our brains through sensory information, right? And so the more that we engage in sensory activities, the more likely we might actually unlock one of those things,
mm-hmm.
right? And so art in all different kinds of ways, like even touching clay. I can't tell you how many clients I have had triggered by the sensation of the wet clay.
Interesting.
right? And dirty hands or whatever, right? And the lack of ability to control it or do exactly what they want with watercolor. And look, there's tons of information that's coming to me as I sit with them. So even if you draw a bunch of stick figures on a piece of paper, I'm watching who you draw first in your family. I'm watching who has to stand next to you, because you have to make decisions as you draw.
Right.
You have to pick one person first. You have to put them, and do they have hands?
Right.
Wow, that guy has really big hands. Or that gal. I mean, there's plenty of trauma caused by women as well. Let's be fair. Okay? Especially in my situation. Not not by me, but by
right,
one of my parents, hopefully. And so art can access, again, parts of the brain that can't necessarily talk.
And that's helping you figure out. I'm sure in a lot of cases they don't know what the significance of them drawing big hands or drawing somebody first, but you're sitting there going, aha, and that's your kind of.
So I won't, and I don't know what it means, but I will
right.
go, that's interesting. I noticed the only person that has hands is Uncle Larry.
Right.
Oh my God, I didn't even realize I drew that.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're going, oh. And then the memory's coming back. Yeah. And it's popping in, but it's partial and it's weird. And it's like, right? So it can be difficult to access those puzzle pieces, and art is one of the things that can pull it up. And look, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And a lot of our memory is kind of stored in that way. It's not stored. You don't have in our brain on December 5th, 2002 at 5 o'clock. It's not, there's pictures, right. There's oranges, right. Those are faces. Like if I asked you about your 21st birthday, you might actually picture some of the places you were, the people that you were with. Okay. Yep. Right. The other thing about art is distance diffuses. Look, even right now, you and I are staring at each other on this call. In the monkey world, if I'm triggered, we're about to have a fight.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you and I are sitting next to each other and we've drawn the thing on the paper and it sits over there, we've externalized it. And now you and I, maybe if we're fighting or whatever, can work to deal with the thing that sits there. Anyway, the thing is over there. And if we can unite against it, right, it externalizes it. There's also a cathartic nature to it. There's something that we look for as art therapists called perseveration. And so if they're making a lot of like tiny little lines, stress might be pouring out. Okay. Right. It's also a powerful marketing to the brain. Okay. There are teachers at Harvard University right now teaching courses in happiness. And one of the things that they explain in these courses is that we are bombarded with marketing material and images and sounds and videos to sell us what happiness means. And that actually we should make it our job marketing to ourselves what we think happiness means. And they actually make a collage of magazines that she wants you to look at when you wake up and when you go to bed to program your head as to what you feel is important, what you want out of life, and what you're grateful for.
Right.
So art is powerful. And you know it. If I say Apple, you might think Apple phone. That image, as soon as you see it, you know exactly what that means.
Right.
But if we can make images that mean something for us, for ourselves, it could be powerful marketing in the opposite direction. And it's not just for artists. Artists are actually the worst. All right. They have a destination in mind. They're trying to make it look a certain way. I don't care about that. I want to know who has hands and who doesn't.
Right. It's more the content and what's behind what's being drawn, exactly. Painted, sculpted,
exactly.
Whatever.
It's the questions I get to ask afterwards, or you get to ask as to, that's interesting. Right.
Right.
The other thing, it can really help in recovery. So licensed advanced alcohol and drug abuse counselor. I've got a book out there called 12 Creative Experiences for Personal Growth and Recovery. So it's not meant to replace AA or the 12 steps, but it's kind of additional art tasks that you can do to enhance it. So anyway, that's out there. And I also recommend, EMDR and EFT, and actually you can use the art therapy with any protocol that's already out there. So in my program where we were learning art therapy at Loyola Marymount, you basically learned all the tools, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, but then you had to execute it not only through talk therapy, but also through the art.
Oh, so it's
So
combining.
trained art therapists will be able to do EMDR, traditional, and with the art.
That's fascinating.
Psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, talk therapy, and through the art. So anyway.
That's wild. So the show is called Twisted Remedies, and I ask everybody that comes on because I'm curious, and I think it helps other people, kind of opens up their possibilities. For me, it's jiu-jitsu. I do cold plunges. I do sauna. I do, music. I do all kinds of stuff. But I ask everybody that comes on, what are your twisted remedies? What's your go-to? And obviously I think jiu-jitsu is probably one of yours. But what works for you? What do you lean on?
Man, we don't have enough hours. I have a lot of tools. But I also have the Wim Hof cold plunge. In the back of my head, I'm constantly taking my cold showers. Got a picture of myself on Instagram doing it. It was amazing. I am also a big fan. It may seem simplistic, but again, I want to be in charge of this story up here. And if what I focus on gets bigger. So I'm a big fan of mindful gratitude journaling. And again, I could spend hours telling you more about exactly what I mean by that. But I want to be in charge of the marketing here. And if something special happens between me and a person, I'm going to journal about it. I'm going to take a picture of it. I'm going to express back to them how grateful I am for whatever this little moment was, which happened the other day with me. There was a woman at jiu-jitsu and she gave me a hug. But I, as the therapist, usually hug and release real quick because I don't want to impose my body on somebody else. And she didn't let go. And in that moment, as a sexual trauma survivor, it's a healing moment because many of us can feel sort of like the icky sticky is attached to us. And if people find out, they won't like us anymore. And so when she's still holding me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm worthy of holding. It's going to be okay. Yep. And I told her that. And then she started almost crying. And anyway, both of us are like, oh my God. So then I write all about it. Anyway, so mindful gratitude journaling. I'm also a huge fan of play. I feel like as adults, we're told to sort of go in our beige box and dress in black and forget how to play. I want to be silly. I want to play. I literally have a swing inside my house. I have a climbing wall. I have monkey bars down the hallway, and I have a full-size punching bag in my foyer.
That's awesome.
And people come in my house and they're like, oh my God. But then then they're like, can I climb on? And I'm like, that's what it's there for. Right? Play. Have fun. Great. I mean, I laugh so much on the mats. Oh my God, all the time. It was not long ago that I figured, well, no, actually it was quite a while ago. I figured out I was holding my breath sometimes during clinch and other things like that. And one of the black belts told me, then you need to sing. Because you can't hold your breath and sing. And the only thing I could come up with that moment as I was going in for my next clinch was jingle bells. Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle. And we're just all laughing.
That could be alarming to your training partner if they don't. That's funny.
They could, right? But I don't know. I want people to laugh and learn how to play again and not take themselves so seriously and just be silly. Our inner child is starving to just play. And I think that's one of the most magical thing about some of the jiu-jitsu too is we just, at least at my school, we are laughing all the time and just hamming it up and good times. So I even have a long list in my coping tools of humorous links that I use to make myself laugh. If, I don't know, I have to do surgery or something. So, and then the surgeon's like, why is she laughing so hard from behind the curtain there? And I'm like, did you see this video? It's great. So good. Anyway.
Anything you have coming up? I'm obviously going to plug, let me hold it up again. I'm going to plug the book in the show notes. I'll go through and pick out some of the stuff you've mentioned and put that in, but is there anything else you want to put out there that people can look up or find?
No, they can reach me via Psychology Today if they want me to do any trauma-informed trainings or consultations if they're running into stuff they don't know how to handle. And of course, that book is easy to find online. And then, of course, if you want the 12 Creative Experiences for Personal Growth and Recovery, that's on oneheartcounselingcenter.com website. But yeah, no, I just want the opportunity to like come into specific schools, see what they're doing, see if I can be helpful. I don't know, therapists that are trying to help somebody who's been triggered or that wants to try this, and instructors that want to know more. I know a police force from another country wanted me to come out because they have spent so much time studying the predators that they never spent how it sort of affects the victim. And he was excited to hear about those trauma pieces and why they're not always the best reporters, for example.
Right.
So yeah, I just want opportunities to share information. I don't have any specific events coming up per se, but yeah, happy to help out in whatever way I can.
Awesome. I stand by my assessment at the beginning that this is going to be amazing, and it was. You definitely didn't disappoint. As one of, I think my dream list was like started with 4 people, and you were one of the 4 people. So this is a milestone for me in the podcast. I'm honored that you came on, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to us.
I appreciate the interview, and thank you for letting me tell that lengthy belt stripe story.
No, that was good stuff. Awesome. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of another episode of Twisted Remedies. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, share, or write a review. Every bit of that pays dividends in helping the podcast grow. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.